climactic.
Hey everybody. I'm going to be a little bit more intentional in this episode than I normally am. My hope is to kind of quickly breeze through some of my recent experiences of traveling to national parks in Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and Arizona. Just basically anywhere within 6 hours of where I currently live here in Salt Lake City. And I hope that it's helpful to anyone who might be interested in seeing this part of the country. I'm going to rank my favorite experiences at these national parks. And just to be clear, these were my experiences. You may go to these same places that I did, and you might have a completely different set of goals or just have a completely different experience yourself. You might go at a different time of the year than I did, or you might get completely different weather when you go. So just keep that in mind as you are listening to my opinions. I've been to some other national parks in the past, but I'm only going to include the ones that I've been to in the last year. Here are the 8 national parks that I will be ranking, but I'm actually going to divide one of them in half based upon its different entrances because they are very different from one another. So I almost think it just deserves to have 2 different rankings. These are the places I'm going to be ranking in alphabetical order. Here we go. Arches, Bryce Canyon, the Island in the Sky entrance of Canyonlands, the Needles entrance of Canyonlands, Capitol Reef National Park, Grand Tetons, the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, and Zion National Parks. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. At number 9, I'm going to go with Capitol Reef. And the main reason why I'm ranking this one so low is that there's this really kind of very ugly power line that meanders throughout the park. It honestly just kind of ruins the otherwise beautiful views at times. Also, this was one of the last national parks that I visited since I moved to Utah over a year ago. And at this point, I'm pretty spoiled by all the amazing things that I've seen. Everything out here is so beautiful that even number 9 on my list was pretty freaking incredible. Honestly, I was almost even a little bit disappointed at first when I got there. But once you get away from that power line and you start like exploring and getting out of the car, exploring and all that stuff, things get a lot better. And there's some very mind-blowing, amazing views there as well. So, like I said, number 9, still good. This park, Capitol Reef, is pretty deep inside the Utah desert, and it's fairly remote out there. I think that some of the best stuff is actually, if I remember correctly, my favorite hike there was actually outside of the park. And the park is pretty gigantic. It goes north and south, but the main road that goes through there goes east and west. So I think you might have to just have like off-roading equipment to see the majority of the park. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but even though the park itself is huge, you only really get to see, I think you really only get to see this small northern road that goes east and west. Oh, and another thing that made this trip fun for me was that Utah's Goblin Valley State Park was nearby, which, I mean, would probably be a national park anywhere else in the country. And I think that I actually enjoyed Goblin Valley as much or more than as I did Capitol Reef. Goblin Valley is filled with a ridiculous amount of hoodoos. If you don't know what hoodoos are, just kind of Google images of them. I could try to explain them, but it wouldn't do it justice. It really takes a poet to describe truly what these things are in words, which is honestly just basically true for all of Southern Utah. It's like, I just wish I was better with words. It's like that scene from Contact where Ellie says, they should have sent a poet. At number 8, I'm going to go with the Needles entrance of Canyonlands National Park. This might be the most remote place that I've ever been, to the point where, if I'm being honest with you, it was honestly a little scary. To get there, you need to be very prepared. There's no cell service out there. There's no gas stations. I mean, it was a very cool experience, but my goodness, it caused me a lot of anxiety to be out there. I went on a hike out there, and the entire time I was hiking, the only thing that I could think is, oh no, if I get lost out here, I'm going to die. Probably my favorite thing about this trip were the petroglyphs on the side of the road on the way to the park. It was actually outside of the park. I think that the petroglyphs were about 300 or 400 years ago, if I remember correctly, and they were very, very cool. As unnerving as it is to be that far away from civilization, it was a wild experience that I will never forget, just being that far out in the middle of nowhere. This was a couple of hours from the town of Moab, I believe. I'm thinking that if I went back there a second time, it wouldn't cause me as much anxiety as it did the first time, knowing what I know now. I mean, honestly, the worst part of it all was just not knowing what I was getting myself into. If I were to do it again, I would print out all the maps. I'd have a paper Utah map in my vehicle, which I can't believe I didn't have. And I'd have a bunch of like Google Maps printouts or whatever as well. And fortunately, my gas tank was pretty full, so I really didn't have to worry about it. But I could imagine a scenario where somebody gets out there with a half tank of fuel thinking, oh, I'll just fuel up when I get to the next gas station. And well, there's not really one out there. There was one that I think sold fuel at 3 times the amount that you would get it anywhere. So it'd be like $9 a gallon, and you only use it in emergencies. It was in a little campground just outside of the park. So worst case scenario, you don't have to run out of gas if you're willing to pay $9 a gallon for fuel. This is another one of those places where if it was anywhere else in the U.S. would be considered so incredible that people would flock to it in droves. But by comparison to some of the other amazing places in Utah, I think you could just find a better bang for your buck elsewhere. I'll never forget those petroglyphs, though. It was so cool to see. And I'll never forget that I was so far out in the middle of nowhere. And I grew up out in the middle of nowhere, and it was nothing like this. Number 7, Zion National Park. I went here twice, and the views were absolutely incredible. Like, you can't believe this exists kind of incredible, you know? This was probably the most unique of the Utah 5 national parks that I visited. The thing that blew my mind about the other parks was the vastness and the wide openness, but I didn't feel that way at Zion. At this park, it was more like being surrounded by rock structures that were so tall and so big that it almost seemed like you were surrounded by giants or gods, for a lack of a better way to describe it. Again, you really kind of need a poet to describe these things. It just kind of makes you feel small to be there. What I hated about it was that it's a little bit too popular, and that's why it's ranked so low on my list. And you have to take a shuttle in the summertime, and you get stuffed into this little bus or shuttle that has just the most unbelievably annoying tourists. As I said in the last episode, I also went there in February when the weather was strangely miserable in the desert. Like, it never rains in the desert, but it rained for like 4 days straight. And because the weather was so bad, I basically had the entire park to myself. And in the off season, you don't have to use the shuttle. So I was just able to drive around. I think that if I'd gone to Zion outside of peak season when you didn't have to use the shuttle, and I'd gone on a day where the weather was much better, I would have ranked this experience much higher. I wouldn't do this one in the summertime. It's just way too crowded. Number 6, Bryce Canyon National Park. More hoodoos, which are absolutely incredible. This park is 8,000 feet in elevation, which is really important to understand. I just recommended going to Zion in the wintertime and off season, but there's a conundrum here because Zion and Bryce are very close to each other. But in the wintertime, Bryce Canyon will be a winter wonderland at 8,000 feet, and Zion won't. Maybe there's a happy medium in there somewhere. When I went to Bryce in February, I got caught in a blizzard, like a bad one. When I went there in July, it was amazing. The weather was great. I mean, it was 8,000 elevation, so it was a little cooler up there than it would be everywhere else in the desert. Although, be forewarned, the sun doesn't let up in Utah in the summertime just because you're at higher elevations. You're still going to need a nice brimmed hat because once you get out into the desert, there are no trees. There's no shade. There's no cover. And it's really important to bring things like water and sunscreen and a good hat, like one that covers your entire face. This place was so cool. It was just these, I guess you'd call them needles, maybe hoodoos, probably a little mix of both. And it's just like all these wild vertical rock structures as far as the eye can see. It's so beautiful. There's a lot of fun hikes to take. This place also has a shuttle service, but unlike Zion, I felt like it was actually a good thing. I mean, the buses weren't so crowded that you felt miserable. And it was probably actually good to have the people kind of explaining what the stops were. Like the bus driver would say, this is whatever stop, and this is what you can see at that stop. So it was pretty good. The shuttle there is good, and I don't even think it's required, if I'm not mistaken. But when I went there with my family, we decided to just go ahead and take it anyway for convenience. At 5th place in my rankings, the Grand Canyon. I don't really feel like I have to describe this one, do I? Everybody knows what the Grand Canyon is, right? It's incredible. The vastness of it just makes a person feel so small, kind of in the same way that looking out at the stars does. But like I said in the last episode, I kind of get what people mean when they say, okay, I saw the Grand Canyon. It's beautiful. Now what? This is another place that has a shuttle, and It was not miserable either. It was fine to use the shuttles there, but I think there were like 8 or 9 stops along the way, and I'm going to be honest with you, they didn't vary a ton from stop to stop. So simultaneously, both two things can be true at the same time. Grand Canyon, absolutely incredible, absolutely mind-blowing, absolutely beautiful. And there's not much variety there. I did not go down into the canyons. We stayed basically at the top of the rim. There's these lyrics that I've heard, and I can't remember what song it came from, but it says something like, I hope I live long enough to see the Grand Canyon. If you know what song this is, send me a message. And I get that, I get that concept, but I'd really prefer that you live long enough to see 1 through 4 on my rankings, because that is where things get truly, truly otherworldly. I'm going to end this episode here, and then I'm going to make another one for the top 4. I'll probably go into a lot more detail on the top 4. And I hope you tune in for the second part too. Have a great day, everybody. Later. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com, TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic, or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.